records every day. Jobs are being outsourced to fascist and communist dictators under the World Trade Agreement and NAFTA, the corporate globalization of the world, to make sure that countries that know how to keep workers in their place, fascist and communist nations, can pull down our standards of living because we've eliminated the barriers to protecting the justice, the economic justice in this country. That's what these globalized trade agreements are all about. Enabling multinational corporations represented by the New York Stock Exchange to ship jobs and industries abroad and allow fascist and communist dictators to pull down our standard of living, our standard of justice. And we cannot stand for that anymore. Now, if anybody up in these offices doesn't think that you are representative of the American people, consider 3 recent polls. 9 out of 10 of the American people think America is in decline. 3 out of 4 believe corporations have too much control over their lives. And 6 out of 10 think the 2 major parties, Republican and Democrats, are failing. So we are representative of the majority, the overwhelming majority of the American people. Much of what's happened in the last month has been predicted by leading journalists, Gretchen Morgenson, Robert Monks, Ben Stein, by papers like the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. But they never seem to want to cover their readers who organize and want to do something about it in this presidential year. That's really a gap, I would say, a gap in journalism. So we're here today not just to speak to the New York Stock Exchange and its CEO, Duncan Niederauer. We're here to speak to the media and ask them, why do you expose all these injustices and then shut out the American people and their representatives from doing something about it? New York City is heading for a deep recession. The financial industry is collapsing all around it. And that has a large ricochet effect on jobs and small businesses throughout the city and the state. Why did this happen? It happened because of some old-fashioned frailties called a combination of greed attached to concentrated power that is unregulated and flared by what Richard Fisher, the head of the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas, called recently, quote, a sustained orgy of excess and speculative behavior on Wall Street, end quote, right from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a government within a government. It's funded by bankers and pretty much controlled by bankers and should be replaced with an accountable central bank accountable to the people of this country through public appropriations and open disclosure. What Wall Street has been doing is taking trillions of dollars of worker pension funds, mutual funds, savings, the financial future of the American people, what they're going to bequeath to their children and grandchildren. And they poured these trillions of dollars into the biggest casino on earth. Casino capitalism, represented by that New York Stock Exchange. The corporate destruction of capitalism, and I address this to the brokers here and the ones that are really exercising over there. You should go over and see it. It's really ironic as they're jumping up and down on the machines. 3 principles of capitalism are destroyed by corporate capitalism. One is that if you own something, you should control it within reasonable bounds. Shareholders own their corporation. Investors own their corporation. They have no power at all. The bosses have the power. And they tell their owners, if you don't like what we're doing, how we're enriching ourselves, how we're tanking our own companies, how we're unemploying workers in these companies in the hundreds of thousands, sell your stock. That's not good enough. Principle of capitalism number 2 is you're free to fail. If you're a small business, you're free to fail. Nobody bails you out. That's the only thing left of capitalism in this country. Because if you're too big to fail, you go to Washington, D.C. to get bailed out. The third principle of capitalism is capitalists should not use government to make an unlevel playing field. They should not use government power to give them privileges, to give them resources at bargain basement prices like the natural resources on the public lands. They should not use government to tilt the imbalance of power in terms of tax-paying obligations between the powerful corporations and the rest of the companies in this country. That's what I mean when I say they have destroyed principles of capitalism. And how important is this? Here's how important it is. Corporations have only 2 symbols. They have only 2 symbols by which they control the American people. One is patriotism, and that's gone out the window as these giant multinationals demonstrate every day that they have no allegiance to our country except to control it or ship its jobs and industries abroad. They have no patriotism in this country. They want to be a national. And the second is market ideology. They're telling you, we're risking our money, and if we make profit, fine, but if we make losses, we have to absorb them. And that is finished now. There are no more symbols that these corporations can use to manipulate the American people. And so they're left with that flag that they have defiled, that flag that they have desecrated, that flag that represents the last words of the Pledge of Allegiance, with liberty and justice for all, not for some, not for a few. The giant bailout of Washington, the giant bailout of Wall Street was predicted by none other than Karl Marx, who said if you give enough rope to the capitalists, you know what they will do with it. The giant bailout of Wall Street by socialism. Imagine socialism bailing out capitalism. It doesn't even get a rate of return. This bailout of $700 billion, I say to you, was the ultimate insult to the American people. There were no public hearings. There were no public hearings where the best minds could be